My mother told the paramedics I was faking. But I wasn't. The first thing I remember is the taste of almonds. Not the sweet kind you put in cookies, but something sharp and wrong that coated my tongue like metal. I was sitting at our dining room table, fork halfway to my mouth with what I thought was regular chicken marsala, when the world started to tilt sideways. "Mom," I said, setting down my fork. My voice sounded weird, like I was talking through cotton. "Something's wrong." Linda, my mother, didn't even look up from cutting her chicken. "What now, Kayla? You've been fine all day." But I wasn't fine. My throat was starting to feel tight, like someone was slowly closing their hands around my neck. I touched my face and felt the skin around my eyes beginning to puff up. Hives were spreading down my arms in angry red welts. "I think I'm having an allergic reaction," I said, standing up so fast my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "Did you use almonds in this? Or almond extract?" That's when Linda finally looked at me, and I saw that familiar expression cross her face. The one that said, "Here we go again." The same look she'd given me last month when I'd had a panic attack during my SATs, or the time before that when I'd fainted at Sarah's birthday party and she told everyone I was attention-seeking. "Kayla Marie Thompson, sit down. You're being ridiculous." Her voice had that sharp edge it always got when she thought I was performing, as she liked to put it. "You don't have any food allergies. Dr. Peterson tested you for everything when you were 12. 4 years ago." I was 12 4 years ago, but pointing that out would only make her angrier. Instead, I stumbled toward the kitchen, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. "I need my EpiPen." "You need to calm down and stop being so dramatic," Linda called after me. "This is just another one of your episodes." My episodes. That's what she called anything that inconvenienced her, my anxiety attacks, my migraines, the time I'd had food poisoning and thrown up for 6 hours straight. All episodes. All fake, according to her. But this wasn't an anxiety attack. I'd had plenty of those, and I knew the difference. This was something else entirely. My vision was starting to blur around the edges, and each breath felt like sucking air through a straw. The hives had spread to my chest now, and my heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I fumbled through the junk drawer where I kept my emergency inhaler and found my EpiPen, expired, I realized with growing panic, checking the date. 6 months expired. When had Linda last checked? When had I? "I'm calling 911, I shouted, or tried to. It came out as more of a wheeze. "You absolutely are not," Linda said, appearing in the doorway with her arms crossed. "Put the phone down, Kayla. You're embarrassing yourself." But I was already dialing, my fingers shaking so badly I had to try twice. The dispatcher's voice sounded far away when she answered, like she was talking to me from the bottom of a well. 911, what's your emergency?" "I'm having an allergic reaction," I gasped. "I can't breathe properly. I'm at 1247 Maple Street, and I need an ambulance." Behind me, I heard Linda sigh dramatically. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. "Absolutely unbelievable." I would remember those words later, when everything fell apart. When the paramedics arrived and Linda told them I was faking. When I coded in the ambulance. When I almost died because my own mother wouldn't believe me. The dispatcher kept me on the line, her voice steady and professional while mine deteriorated into raspy whispers. "The ambulance is en route, honey. Can you tell me your symptoms?" "Hives everywhere," I managed, slumping against the kitchen counter. Throat closing up. Face swelling. My lips feel huge. I caught sight of myself in the toaster's reflection and barely recognized the puffy, red-splotched face staring back. "Okay, that sounds like anaphylaxis. Do you have an EpiPen?" "Expired," I wheezed. "Don't use it unless you absolutely have to. Help is coming. Stay with me, Kayla." Linda stormed back into the kitchen, her face flushed with anger. "Hang up that phone right now. You're wasting emergency resources, and when they get here and find out you're fine, we're going to get a bill for this ambulance ride that we can't afford." Money. It always came back to money with her. Last year when I dislocated my shoulder during volleyball practice, she'd made me wait 3 hours in the nurse's office while she debated whether it was emergency room worthy, or if we should just wait for urgent care to open in the morning. "Ma'am." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone. "Is someone there with you?" "My mother," I gasped. "Can you put her on the line?" I held out the phone to Linda with a shaking hand, but she backed away like it might bite her. "I'm not talking to them. This is your mess, Kayla. You figure it out." The room started to spin, and I had to grab the edge of the sink to keep from falling. Through the kitchen window, I could see our neighbor Mrs. Chen watering her garden. She'd helped me with my science project last spring when Linda was too busy with her book club. For a wild moment, I considered trying to get her attention. "The paramedics should be there in about 3 minutes, the dispatcher said. "How are you feeling now?" "Worse. So much worse." The tightness in my throat had progressed to the point where I felt like I was breathing through a coffee stirrer. My tongue felt thick and foreign in my mouth. "Can't talk much anymore." "That's okay. Save your energy. Just try to stay calm. Stay calm." If I had $1 for every time someone told me to stay calm, I could probably pay for this ambulance ride myself. But this wasn't about staying calm. This was about staying alive. Linda was pacing now, muttering under her breath about insurance deductibles and how I was going to ruin our family's reputation in the neighborhood. "People are going to think I'm a bad mother," she said, more to herself than to me. "They're going to think I can't control my own daughter." The irony wasn't lost on me, even through the haze of oxygen deprivation. She was worried about looking like a bad mother while actively being one. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Red and blue lights flickered through the front windows, casting strange shadows across our beige walls. Linda's pacing stopped abruptly. "Now look what you've done," she said, her voice ice cold. "The whole street is going to come out to gawk." I wanted to tell her that I didn't care about the neighbors, that I just wanted to breathe normally again, that I was scared and needed her to act like my mother instead of my enemy. But the words wouldn't come. The sirens were right outside now, and heavy footsteps were approaching our front door. Here they come, I whispered to the dispatcher. I had no idea that the worst part hadn't even started yet. The paramedics knocked firmly on our front door, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the house. I tried to call out that we were in the kitchen, but all that came out was a strangled wheeze. My legs finally gave out, and I slid down the cabinet doors until I was sitting on the cold linoleum floor. I'll handle this, Linda said, smoothing down her hair and adjusting her blouse like she was greeting dinner guests instead of emergency responders. Stay there and try to look normal. Try to look normal. As if I could magically deflate my swollen face and make the angry red hives disappear through sheer willpower. I heard Linda's voice at the front door, artificially sweet in the way it got when she talked to my teachers or the neighbors. Oh, hello, officers. I'm so sorry about this. There's been a misunderstanding. Officers. They were paramedics, not police. Unless someone had called both. Heavy boots stomped across our hardwood floors, heading toward the kitchen. 2 paramedics rounded the corner, a tall black woman with kind eyes and a stocky white guy who looked like he'd seen everything. The woman immediately dropped to her knees beside me, pulling a penlight from her pocket. Hey there, Kayla. I'm Sarah, and this is my partner Mike. We're here to help you, okay? She shined the light in my eyes, checking my pupils. Can you tell me what you ate tonight? I pointed weakly toward the dining room where my half-finished plate still sat on the table. Chicken, I wheezed. But something was wrong. Tasted like almonds. Mike was already heading toward the kitchen stove, lifting pot lids and checking ingredients. Ma'am, he called to Linda, who had followed them in, did you use any tree nuts in tonight's dinner? Of course not, Linda said immediately. Kayla doesn't have any food allergies. She's just having one of her anxiety episodes. This happens all the time, she gets worked up about tests or boys or whatever, and suddenly she's convinced she's dying. Sarah's hand stilled on my wrist where she was taking my pulse. Something shifted in her expression, and when she looked at Linda, her voice took on a different tone. Ma'am, your daughter is presenting with classic signs of anaphylaxis. Her pulse is 140, her airway is compromised, and she's covered in urticaria, that's hives. This isn't anxiety. It absolutely is anxiety, Linda insisted, crossing her arms. I know my own daughter. She's been pulling stunts like this since she was 14. Last month she convinced her school nurse she was having a heart attack because she had a math test she didn't study for. That wasn't what happened. I'd had chest pains during PE, and the nurse had been the one who insisted on calling Linda. But there was no point in trying to correct her now, I could barely breathe, let alone argue. Mike returned from his investigation holding a small bottle. Almond extract, he announced grimly. Half empty. Looks like it was used tonight. That's impossible, Linda snapped. I've been cooking that recipe for years. I never use almond extract. Ma'am, I need you to step back and let us work, Sarah said firmly. She was pulling supplies from her kit, and 4 bag, what looked like medication. Kayla, I'm going to start in 4 and give you some epinephrine and steroids, okay? You're going to feel better soon. She doesn't need medication, Linda said, her voice rising. She needs to calm down and stop being so dramatic. I am not paying for an unnecessary ambulance ride because my daughter wants attention. Sarah and Mike exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Ma'am, we need your consent to treat your daughter since she's a minor. My heart stopped. Even through the haze of allergic reaction, I understood what that meant. Linda had to say yes. And from the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she was shaking her head, I realized with growing horror that she wasn't going to. No, Linda said firmly. Absolutely not. We're not doing this again. The word no hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah's eyes widened, and Mike stopped mid-motion, a syringe of epinephrine halfway out of his kit. Ma'am, I'm not sure you understand, Sarah said carefully, her professional composure starting to crack. Your daughter's blood pressure is dropping. Her oxygen saturation is at 86%. Without treatment, this could become life-threatening very quickly. She's fine, Linda insisted, but I could hear something desperate creeping into her voice. Look at her, she's sitting up, she's talking. If this was really serious, she'd be unconscious or something. Mike stood up slowly, towering over my mother. Ma'am, people die from anaphylaxis. This isn't a joke or a drill. We need to administer epinephrine now. I said no. Linda's voice was steel. I'm her mother, and I know when my daughter is really sick versus when she's having a panic attack. She does this every few months, finds some excuse to call 911, makes a huge scene, costs us hundreds of dollars, and then miraculously feels better once she gets attention. The room was starting to tilt again, colors bleeding together at the edges of my vision. I tried to speak, to tell them about the time last year when Linda had accused me of faking strep throat until my fever hit 104, or about how she'd made me walk on a sprained ankle for 3 days because she thought I was trying to get out of chores. But the words came out as nothing more than a rasp. Sarah was on her radio now, speaking in quick, clipped sentences. We need immediate backup at 1247 Maple Street. Minor patient in anaphylaxis, parent refusing consent for treatment. Request police assistance for emergency authorization. You called the police. Linda shrieked. On me? I'm trying to protect my daughter from unnecessary medical procedures, and you're treating me like a criminal. Ma'am, your daughter's lips are blue, Mike said bluntly. Her throat is closing. In about 5 minutes, she's going to lose consciousness, and after that. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I could feel it happening exactly like he described. The kitchen was getting dimmer, sounds becoming muffled and distant. My chest felt like someone had wrapped steel bands around it and was tightening them notch by notch. I fumbled for my phone, still clutched in my shaking hand, and managed to open the camera app. If I was going to die, I wanted there to be evidence of what I looked like, proof that this wasn't fake. The girl staring back at me from the phone screen was unrecognizable. My face was so swollen that my eyes were nearly swollen shut, just narrow slits in puffy red flesh. My lips looked like someone had inflated them with a bike pump, and my neck was twice its normal size. Angry welts covered every visible inch of skin. Look, I wheezed, holding up the phone toward Linda with tremendous effort. Look at me. For the first time since the paramedics arrived, Linda actually looked, really looked, at my face. I saw something flicker across her expression, a crack in her certainty. But then her jaw tightened again. "You're making yourself look worse," she said, but her voice wavered slightly. "You're working yourself up and making the hives worse by panicking." New sirens wailed outside, getting closer. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Chen standing in her yard, her hand pressed to her mouth in concern. Other neighbors were starting to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion. "Great," Linda muttered. "Just great. Now the whole neighborhood thinks I'm some kind of monster." The irony of that statement hit me even through my oxygen-deprived haze. She wasn't worried about being a monster, she was worried about looking like one. My vision was graying out at the edges now, and I could feel consciousness slipping away from me like water through a sieve. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was Sarah's voice, urgent and afraid. "We're losing her." I woke up to the sound of my mother screaming. Not the high-pitched shriek she used when she was angry about dishes left in the sink or homework forgotten on the kitchen table. This was something primal and terrified, the kind of sound I'd never heard from her before. It took me a few seconds to realize I was flat on my back on our kitchen floor, staring up at the ceiling light fixture that had been broken since last Christmas. "Can't do this without consent." Linda was yelling. "I'll sue you. I'll sue the whole department." "Ma'am, step back now, or you will be arrested for interfering with emergency medical care," a new voice said, deeper, authoritative. "Police." I tried to turn my head to see what was happening, but my neck felt like it was encased in concrete. Everything was moving in slow motion, sounds filtering through what felt like thick cotton. Sarah was beside me, her hands working quickly, and I felt a sharp pinch in my arm. "There we go, Kayla," she murmured. "Got the 4 in. Mike, push the AP now." Something cold flooded my veins, and almost immediately I felt like I could take a slightly deeper breath. The steel bands around my chest loosened just enough for me to gasp out, "Please." That one word seemed to cut through everything else in the room. Linda stopped screaming. The police officer stopped whatever he was saying into his radio. Everyone looked down at me. "Please don't let me die," I whispered, looking directly at my mother. For a moment, just one moment, I saw Linda's face crumple. She pressed her hand to her mouth, and I thought maybe, finally, she was seeing what everyone else could see. That this was real. That I was really dying. But then she straightened up, and that familiar stubborn mask slammed back into place. "Stop being so dramatic, Kayla," she said, but her voice shook. "You're not dying. People don't die from anxiety attacks." "This isn't anxiety, ma'am," the police officer said. Officer Martinez, according to his name tag. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of patient expression that suggested he'd dealt with difficult parents before. "I have 3 kids myself, and I can tell you that what I'm looking at right now is a medical emergency." Mike was preparing another syringe, something clear that he injected into my 4-line. "Solomedrol," he explained to Sarah. 125 milligrams. "What is that?" Linda demanded. "What are you giving her?" "Steroids to reduce the inflammation," Sarah said without looking up from her equipment. "Blood pressure is coming up, 90/60. Still low, but better." Officer Martinez stepped closer to Linda, his voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to understand something. If we don't treat your daughter right now, she could go into cardiac arrest. Her body is shutting down. This isn't about anxiety or attention-seeking, this is about keeping her alive." "She's lying," Linda said, but the conviction was draining out of her voice. "She's always lying about being sick. Last year she claimed she had appendicitis, and it turned out to be gas pains. That wasn't what happened either. I'd had severe stomach pain that lasted 3 days, and Linda had finally taken me to urgent care where they diagnosed me with a kidney infection. But the infection had been so advanced by then that I'd needed 4 antibiotics and nearly ended up in the hospital anyway." "Ma'am, look at your daughter's face," Officer Martinez said quietly. This time Linda really looked, and I watched the color drain from her cheeks. With the swelling and hives, I probably looked like something from a horror movie. My phone was still clutched in my hand, and when I managed to lift it enough to see the screen, I could barely recognize myself. "The almond extract," Mike said suddenly. He was holding the bottle again, reading the label. "Mrs. Thompson, this is pure almond extract. When did you add this to the chicken?" "I didn't," Linda said automatically. "I told you, I never use." She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening. "Oh my god. The marsala sauce. I ran out of vanilla extract yesterday, and I thought. I read somewhere that you could substitute." The bottle slipped from Mike's hands and clattered to the floor. "How much did you use?" Sarah asked urgently. Linda's face went white. 2 tablespoons. Maybe 3. The recipe called for vanilla, but I thought almond would taste better. 3 tablespoons of pure almond extract. Enough to trigger anaphylaxis in someone severely allergic to tree nuts. Enough to kill me. The worst part was watching the realization hit my mother's face, the moment she understood that this time, I really wasn't faking. The silence that followed Linda's confession felt like it lasted forever. 3 tablespoons of pure almond extract. I could see everyone in the room doing the math, understanding just how close I'd come to dying because my mother had made a simple cooking mistake and then refused to believe the consequences. "We need to move her now," Sarah said, breaking the quiet. "The epinephrine is helping, but she needs continuous monitoring. Sometimes you get what's called a biphasic reaction. Symptoms can come back even worse in a few hours." "Biphasic?" Linda's voice was small now, all the fight drained out of her. "What does that mean?" "It means this isn't over," Mike said grimly as he and Sarah began transferring me onto a stretcher they brought in. "About 30% of anaphylaxis cases have a second wave of symptoms between 4 and 8 hours later. She needs to be in a hospital." Linda stood frozen as they wheeled me toward the front door. Through the windows, I could see half our neighborhood had gathered on the sidewalk, Mrs. Chen, the Johnsons from across the street, even cranky Mr. Peterson who never talked to anyone. Their faces were worried, confused, some openly staring at the spectacle of an ambulance in our usually quiet cul-de-sac. I'm riding with her, Linda announced suddenly, hurrying to catch up. No ma'am, you're not, Officer Martinez said firmly. You're going to need to follow in your own vehicle. She's my daughter. Linda protested. She's a minor who you just refused life-saving treatment for, Sarah said bluntly. Hospital policy is that we don't transport with parents who have interfered with care. I wanted to feel vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired. The medication was helping, I could breathe easier now, and some of the swelling in my face was going down, but I felt hollow inside, like someone had scooped out my chest and left an empty space where my heart used to be. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I caught a glimpse of Linda standing in our driveway. She looked smaller somehow, older, her perfect suburban mom facade finally cracking. Mrs. Chen had walked over and was saying something to her, probably asking if there was anything she could do to help. Kayla, Linda called out as they were closing the ambulance doors. Sweetheart, I'm sorry. I didn't know. But then the doors slammed shut, cutting off her words. The ride to St. Mary's Hospital took 12 minutes according to the digital clock on the ambulance wall. Sarah checked my vitals every 2 minutes, writing numbers on a clipboard that I couldn't see but suspected weren't great based on her increasingly worried expression. How are you feeling? She asked as we pulled into the hospital bay. Like I got hit by a truck, I croaked. My throat still felt raw and swollen, and talking was an effort. But better than before. That's the epinephrine working. You're going to feel pretty wired for a while, it's basically medical-grade adrenaline. She paused, checking something on her monitor. Kayla, I have to ask, has your mother ever refused medical treatment for you before? The question hung in the air between us. I could lie, could protect Linda the way I'd been protecting her for years by not telling teachers or doctors or anyone else about her pattern of dismissing my health concerns. I could say this was a one-time mistake, that she was just scared and confused. But as we rolled through the emergency room doors and I saw the crowd of medical personnel waiting for us, their faces serious and focused, I realized I was tired of lying. Yes, I whispered. She never believes me when I'm sick. Sarah squeezed my hand gently. Well, we believe you now. The emergency room at St. Mary's was nothing like the calm, controlled environment I'd imagined. It was chaos, beeping machines, shouting nurses, the sharp smell of disinfectant mixed with something I couldn't identify. They wheeled me into a room marked Trauma Bay 3, where what felt like a dozen people immediately surrounded my stretcher. 16-year-old female, anaphylaxis secondary to tree nut ingestion, Sarah rattled off to a doctor who looked barely older than my college-aged cousin. Approximately 3 tablespoons of pure almond extract consumed 47 minutes ago. Initial vitals showed BP 80/50, oxygen sat 86%, pulse 140. We've given 0.3 mg AP and 125 mg solomedrol 4. Current vitals are BP 95/62, pulse 118, oxygen sat 94%. Dr. Patel, according to his badge, lifted my swollen eyelids and shined a penlight into my pupils. Any family history of severe allergies? I don't know, I admitted. My mom says I was tested when I was 12, but that was negative. Allergies can develop at any time, he said, listening to my chest with a stethoscope. Especially tree nut allergies. Sometimes the first reaction is mild, and then subsequent exposures can be life-threatening. He paused, looking at my chart. It says here the parent initially refused treatment. A nurse I hadn't seen before looked up from preparing an 4-bag. The paramedics had to get police involved. Mom insisted the kid was faking. Dr. Patel's eyebrows rose, but he didn't comment. Let's get another round of vitals and start continuous monitoring. I want a second dose of AP ready in case we see any regression, and let's add some Benadryl to help with the itching. The next few hours blurred together, blood draws, chest x-rays, constant vital sign checks. My face gradually returned to something resembling normal, though I could still feel the phantom tightness in my throat every time I swallowed. Around 9 p.m., a social worker appeared. Hi Kayla, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Patient Services, she said, settling into the plastic chair beside my bed. She was maybe 30, with kind eyes and a soft voice that immediately put me on edge. Social workers only got involved when there were problems. How are you feeling? Better, I said cautiously. The swelling's mostly gone down. That's great. I wanted to talk to you about what happened today. The medical team has some concerns about the delay in your treatment. Through the thin curtain separating my bed from the hallway, I could hear Linda's voice arguing with someone at the nurse's station. Been here for 4 hours and nobody will tell me anything. She's my daughter. The HIPAA laws are very clear, ma'am, a tired-sounding nurse responded. She's 16, which means she can make her own decisions about who receives her medical information. I'd asked them not to talk to Linda when they brought me up from the ER. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed time to think without her voice in my head telling me how I should feel about what had happened. Jennifer followed my gaze toward the curtain. Your mother has been asking to see you. Are you ready for that conversation? I don't know, I said honestly. She almost let me die because she thought I was being dramatic. How do you come back from that? That's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you. Jennifer pulled out a tablet and stylus. I need to document what happened today, and I need to ask some difficult questions. The paramedics report indicates this isn't the first time your medical concerns have been dismissed. Can you tell me about other incidents? The floodgates opened. For years of doctor visits delayed until infections became serious. Broken bones dismissed as sprains until the pain became unbearable. Panic attacks treated like attention-seeking behavior instead of the genuine mental health crises they were. I told her about the time Linda made me finish a volleyball game on a fractured wrist because she thought I was trying to get out of playing. About the kidney infection that could have turned septic because stomach pain was probably just cramps. Jennifer typed steadily, occasionally asking for specific dates or details. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Kayla, what happened today constitutes medical neglect under state law. The fact that your mother prevented paramedics from treating a life-threatening condition could result in criminal charges. She looked up from her tablet. But you're old enough to have a voice in how we proceed. What do you want to happen next? Outside my room, Linda was still arguing with the nurses, her voice getting higher and more desperate. Part of me wanted to call her in, to let her hold my hand and pretend everything was normal. But a bigger part of me was terrified that if I forgave her now, nothing would ever change. I want her to admit what she did was wrong, I whispered. I want her to believe me. Jennifer nodded slowly. Let's start there. When Jennifer finally left, promising to return in the morning to discuss next steps, I was alone with the steady beep of the heart monitor and my own thoughts. The Benadryl was making me drowsy, but every time I started to drift off, I'd jolt awake with the phantom sensation of my throat closing. Around 11 p.m., there was a soft knock on my door. I expected to see another nurse, but instead, Dad stood in the doorway. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since this morning. His usually neat hair was disheveled, his work shirt wrinkled like he'd driven straight from his office in Denver. Hey, kiddo, he said quietly. Mind if I come in? I nodded, suddenly feeling like I might cry. Dad and I weren't particularly close. His job kept him traveling 3 weeks out of every month, but he'd never once accused me of faking anything. When I'd had pneumonia in 8th grade, he'd been the one to insist we go to the ER despite Linda's protests that it was just a cold. He pulled the plastic chair closer to my bed and sat down heavily. I got Linda's call around 6. She said you'd had an allergic reaction, but that you were fine now and I didn't need to come back early for my trip. I almost died, Dad, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. His face crumpled. I know. I talked to Dr. Patel when I got here. He said. He took a shaky breath. He said if they'd waited another 10 minutes to treat you, we might be having a very different conversation right now. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that settling between us. Finally, I asked the question I'd been dreading, where's Mom? In the family waiting room. She's been crying for the past hour, asking me to convince you to see her. Dad rubbed his temples. Kayla, I need to know, has this happened before? Not the allergic reaction, but has she refused to get you help when you needed it? Another crossroads. Another chance to protect Linda or protect myself. I thought about the social worker's tablet full of incidents, about the paramedics' shocked expression when my mother said no. Last spring, remember when you were in Seattle for that conference? I had severe stomach pain for 3 days. It was so bad I couldn't stand up straight, but she kept saying it was just gas or cramps from my period. Dad's face darkened as I continued. She finally took me to urgent care on day 4, but only because I passed out at school and a nurse called her. Turned out I had a kidney infection that had spread to my bloodstream. Jesus Christ, Dad whispered. Why didn't you tell me? I tried. I called you that second night, remember? But she took the phone and told you I was being dramatic about period cramps. The memory still stung. I'd been curled up on my bathroom floor, burning with fever, listening to Linda's laugh as she assured Dad that teenage girls were just naturally prone to theatrics. Dad was quiet for so long I thought maybe he'd stop listening. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. The kidney infection, Dr. Williams said if you'd waited another day, you could have gone into septic shock. I know. And today, with the allergic reaction. She told the paramedics I was faking. She wouldn't let them give me the shot. My throat tightened with the memory. Dad, I really thought I was going to die. And she was more worried about the ambulance bill than about me. He stood up abruptly and started pacing the small room. She's been gaslighting you. For years, she's been making you question your own medical needs. He stopped, turning to face me. Honey, I am so sorry. I should have seen this. I should have protected you. You weren't here, I said simply. You're never here. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but they were true. Dad's absence had left me alone with Linda's dismissiveness, with no one to advocate for me when I genuinely needed help. That's going to change, he said firmly. I don't care what it costs my career. I'm not leaving you alone with her again until we figure this out. From the hallway, I could hear Linda's voice again, pleading with a nurse to let her see me. She's my baby, she was saying. I made a mistake, but she's my baby. Dad heard it too. What do you want to do about her? I closed my eyes, exhaustion pulling at me despite everything. I don't know. I'm so tired, Dad. I'm tired of having to prove I'm really sick. I'm tired of being afraid that the next time something happens, she won't believe me again. You shouldn't have to live like that, he said quietly. Outside my room, Linda's voice grew louder, more desperate. Tomorrow, I'd have to face her. Tomorrow, I'd have to decide whether to press charges or find some way to forgive the unforgivable. But tonight, for the first time in years, someone finally believed me. The next morning brought Dr. Patel with a clipboard full of discharge papers and a serious expression that made my stomach drop. Dad was asleep in the reclining chair beside my bed, still in yesterday's wrinkled work clothes, but he stirred when the doctor cleared his throat. How are you feeling, Kayla? Dr. Patel asked, checking the readouts on my monitors one last time. Better. Still tired, but I can breathe normally. I touched my throat experimentally. The swelling was completely gone, but I kept expecting that terrifying tightness to return. Good. Your vitals have been stable for 12 hours, which means we're past the danger zone for a biphasic reaction. He pulled up the plastic chair that seemed to live permanently beside hospital beds. But we need to talk about what happens next. Dad sat up straighter, immediately alert despite his obvious exhaustion. Is there permanent damage? Long-term effects? Physically, she should recover completely. But Kayla now has a confirmed severe tree nut allergy. This means she needs to carry an EpiPen at all times, read every food label, inform restaurants about her allergy. Dar. Patel's expression grew more serious. And honestly, given what happened yesterday with the delayed treatment, she needs a reliable adult who will take her symptoms seriously. The unspoken criticism of Linda hung in the air. Dad's jaw tightened, but he just nodded. There's something else, Dr. Patel continued. I've been reviewing your medical records from the past few years, and I'm seeing a concerning pattern. Multiple instances where you presented with serious symptoms that were initially dismissed as anxiety or attention-seeking behavior. He flipped through papers on his clipboard. March 2023, kidney infection that progressed to early sepsis. September 2023, fractured wrist that went untreated for 6 days. January 2024, severe strep throat that led to a peritonsillar abscess. Each incident felt like a punch to the gut. Hearing them listed clinically like that made the pattern impossible to ignore. Every single one of these could have had serious complications if treatment had been delayed much longer, Dr. Patel said gently. Yesterday's anaphylaxis was just the most dramatic example. What are you saying? Dad asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. I'm saying that as Kayla's physician, I have concerns about her medical safety at home. The social worker documented multiple instances of medical neglect. Dr. Patel looked directly at me. Kayla, you have the right to request that your mother not be included in your medical decisions. You're 16, which means you have significant autonomy over your healthcare. Through the door's window, I could see Linda pacing in the hallway. She'd been there since 6 a.m. according to the nurse, clutching a cup of coffee and asking every passing medical professional if they'd spoken to me yet. She looked awful, her usual perfect makeup was gone, her hair unwashed, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. She wants to see you, Dad said quietly, following my gaze. She's been asking every hour. What did you tell her? That it's your choice. He paused. But Kayla, I think she's genuinely scared. I've never seen her like this before. Dr. Patel checked his watch. I can discharge you this afternoon, but first we need to establish a safety plan. New EpiPens, follow up with an allergist, and honestly, a conversation about your living situation. What do you mean? I asked, though part of me already suspected. Jennifer Walsh will be back this morning. Based on yesterday's incident and a documented history of medical neglect, Child Protective Services is required to investigate. His voice was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. That doesn't automatically mean removal from the home, but it does mean oversight and mandatory changes. Dad went pale. CPS. Linda made one mistake. Mr. Thompson, with respect, this wasn't one mistake. This was a pattern culminating in a life-threatening emergency. Dr. Patel stood, tucking the clipboard under his arm. I'll be back in an hour to discuss discharge planning. Think about what kind of support system Kayla needs going forward. After he left, Dad and I sat in heavy silence. Outside, Linda had stopped pacing and was now sitting on a bench, her head in her hands. She looks broken, I said softly. You almost died because of her stubbornness, Dad replied. Broken might be appropriate. But looking at her hunched figure through the glass, I felt something I hadn't expected, guilt. Not for being sick, not for calling 911, but for the investigation that was about to tear our family apart. Even after everything, some part of me still wanted to protect her. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts, and Jennifer Walsh appeared in the doorway with a different person, an older woman in a navy blazer who carried herself with the kind of authority that made my stomach clench. Good morning, Kayla. This is Detective Sarah Morrison from the District Attorney's Office, Jennifer said, settling into her familiar chair while Detective Morrison remained standing. She'd like to ask you a few questions about yesterday. Detective Morrison had gray-streaked hair and tired eyes that suggested she'd seen too many cases like mine. I know this is difficult timing, but we need to move quickly on this. Your mother is potentially facing charges of child endangerment and interference with emergency medical services. Charges? Dad sat forward sharply. Look, Linda made a terrible mistake, but... Mr. Thompson, your wife prevented paramedics from treating your daughter's anaphylaxis for over 20 minutes, Detective Morrison said bluntly. During that time, Kayla's condition deteriorated to the point where she lost consciousness. Officer Martinez's report states that Mrs. Thompson physically blocked the paramedics and called the emergency response unnecessary. The clinical description made it sound even worse somehow. I remembered the desperation in Sarah's voice when she'd radioed for police backup, the way Mike had looked at Linda like she was speaking a foreign language. There's also the pattern documented by the hospital's social worker, Detective Morrison continued, consulting a tablet. Multiple instances over the past 2 years where medical treatment was delayed or denied despite serious symptoms. What does this mean for me? I asked quietly. That depends partly on what you want to happen, she said, pulling up the remaining chair. You're old enough that your testimony would carry significant weight. If you're willing to speak about the history of medical neglect, we can pursue felony charges. If not... She shrugged. Without your cooperation, we're looking at misdemeanors at best. Through the window, I could see Linda still sitting on that bench, occasionally wiping her eyes with tissues. A part of me wanted to march out there and scream at her, to make her understand how terrified I'd been when I couldn't breathe and she wouldn't let anyone help me. But another part, the part that had spent 16 years trying to earn her approval, whispered that maybe this was going too far. I need to see her first, I said suddenly. Before I decide anything, I need to talk to my mom. Detective Morrison exchanged a look with Jennifer. Are you sure that's wise? Sometimes confronting the person who harmed you can be re-traumatizing. She didn't mean to harm me, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I believed them. She thought she was protecting me from... I don't know, from making a fool of myself or wasting money or something. Kayla, Dad said gently, you don't have to protect her anymore. But that was exactly the problem, I didn't know how to stop. Even now, after everything, my first instinct was to find excuses for Linda's behavior, to minimize what had happened so our family could go back to pretending everything was normal. 5 minutes, I told Detective Morrison. I want to talk to her for 5 minutes, and then I'll give you my answer about the charges. Jennifer looked concerned. I should probably be present for that conversation, given the circumstances. No. I surprised myself with how firm my voice sounded. Just me and her. Dad can wait outside the door if that makes everyone feel better, but I need to hear what she has to say when it's just us. Because after 16 years of having my medical concerns dismissed, after nearly dying because my own mother refused to believe I was in danger, I deserve to look Linda in the eye and ask her one simple question. Was protecting her pride really worth more than my life? Detective Morrison left to get Linda, and Dad positioned himself just outside my door where he could see through the window but couldn't hear our conversation. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I watched Linda approach down the hallway, her steps hesitant and uncertain. She looked terrible. Her usually perfect blonde hair hung limp and unwashed, her mascara had left dark streaks down her cheeks, and the designer blouse she'd been so proud of yesterday was wrinkled beyond repair. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold, they were red-rimmed and desperate, darting around the room like she was looking for an escape route. Kayla, sweetheart, she said, hovering near the foot of my bed like she was afraid to come closer. Thank God you're okay. I was so scared. You were scared. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I couldn't help it. Mom, you told the paramedics I was faking. You wouldn't let them give me the shot that saved my life. Linda's face crumpled, and she sank into the plastic chair. I know, and I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake. She reached toward my hand, then pulled back when I flinched. But honey, you have to understand, you've had so many false alarms over the years. The panic attacks, the times you convinced yourself you had appendicitis or meningitis or whatever you'd read about online. Those weren't false alarms, I said quietly. The kidney infection was real. The broken wrist was real. The strep throat that turned into an abscess was real. But the anxiety attacks are also real. My voice broke, and I had to take a shaky breath before continuing. Mom, anxiety attacks are a real medical condition. Just because you can't see them on an x-ray doesn't mean I was making them up. Linda stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. After a moment, she shook her head slowly. You're 16, Kayla. When I was your age, we didn't run to the doctor every time we felt worried or upset. We handled things ourselves. I nearly died yesterday because you thought I should handle it myself. I didn't know about the almond extract, she said, her voice rising. How was I supposed to know you developed some new allergy? You've eaten almonds before, remember those almond croissants you loved when you were 14? Allergies can develop at any time. Dr. Patel explained that. I studied her face, looking for some sign that she understood the gravity of what had happened. Mom, my lips were blue. My face was so swollen I looked like a different person. How could you see that and still think I was faking? Linda was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands twisted in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because if you weren't faking, then that meant I'd been wrong. About everything. The admission hung between us like a live wire. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, Linda looked truly vulnerable, not angry or defensive, just broken. It meant I'd been dismissing real medical emergencies for years, she continued, tears streaming down her cheeks. It meant I'd been a terrible mother who ignored her daughter's pain because it was easier than admitting I didn't know what I was doing. I felt something shift in my chest, not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. So you'd rather let me die than admit you were wrong? Linda's sob echoed off the sterile hospital walls. I never thought you would actually die, Kayla. I swear to God, if I believed for 1 second that you were really in danger. She looked up at me, her makeup completely destroyed, her perfect facade finally cracked wide open. I was so afraid of being wrong that I couldn't see I was killing you. Outside the room, I could see Detective Morrison checking her watch, waiting for my decision about the charges. But looking at my mother's devastated face, I realized the most important question wasn't whether Linda deserved to be punished. It was whether she was capable of change. I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, I said, wiping my own eyes with the scratchy hospital tissue. When I called you last year about the chest pains during PE, what did you tell Mrs. Henderson? Linda's face went pale. Kayla, that's not. What did you tell her, Mom? She was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. Finally, in a voice I could barely hear, I told her you were going through a dramatic phase. That teenage girls sometimes convinced themselves they were having heart attacks when they were really just anxious about boys or grades. I had an irregular heartbeat. The EKG at urgent care showed it. My throat felt tight again, but not from allergies this time. Mrs. Henderson wanted to call an ambulance, but you convinced her to let me sit in the nurse's office for 2 hours instead. The doctor said it was probably nothing. Probably. He said probably nothing, but that I needed follow-up with a cardiologist. I stared at her. Did we ever go to a cardiologist, Mom? Linda's silence was answer enough. She'd canceled the cardiology appointment, insisting that if it was really serious, the urgent care doctor would have admitted me to the hospital. And when I dislocated my shoulder during volleyball, I continued, feeling something cold and determined settle in my chest. You made me wait 3 hours to see if it would pop back in on its own, because you'd read that online somewhere. Kayla, please. And the kidney infection. 3 days, Mom. 3 days I was burning up with fever, throwing up bile, and you kept saying it was just a stomach bug. My voice was getting stronger now, fed by years of suppressed anger. Do you remember what you told Dad when he called to check on me? Linda's hands were shaking. I don't. You told him I was being a baby about cramps. You laughed about it. I could hear you laughing while I was curled up on the bathroom floor thinking I was going to die. Stop. The word came out as barely a whisper. And yesterday, when my throat was closing and I couldn't breathe, your first concern was what the neighbors would think. I leaned forward, needing her to really hear this. Even when I showed you the picture of my face on my phone, even when I begged you not to let me die, you cared more about looking right than keeping me alive. Linda was sobbing now, ugly broken sounds that might have made me feel guilty yesterday. But today, after everything, they just sounded like the truth finally catching up with her. I know, she choked out. God help me, I know. I've been telling myself you were dramatic because admitting you were really sick meant admitting I was a failure as a mother. Through the window, I could see Detective Morrison approaching with a clipboard. Decision time. The detective wants to know if I'll testify against you, I said. They're talking about felony charges. Child endangerment. Linda's eyes went wide with terror. Kayla, please. I know I messed up, but if I get convicted of a felony, I'll lose my job. We'll lose the house. Your college fund. So now you're worried about my future. The bitter laugh that escaped me sounded foreign to my own ears. Yesterday you were willing to let me die over an ambulance bill, but now you're concerned about my college fund. Linda opened her mouth to respond, but Detective Morrison's knock on the door cut her off. Time's up, the detective said gently. Kayla, what's your decision? I looked at my mother one last time, really looked at her, seeing not the perfect suburban mom she pretended to be, but the broken woman who'd been so terrified of being wrong that she'd nearly killed her own daughter. I need 1 more day to decide, I said finally. Because I just realized that this choice wasn't really about Linda at all. It was about who I wanted to be. Detective Morrison granted me 24 hours, but word of the potential charges had already leaked somehow. By that afternoon, our house was surrounded by news vans and reporters shouting questions about medical neglect and mother refuses treatment. Dad had to sneak me out the hospital service entrance just to avoid the cameras. This is insane, he muttered, pulling his baseball cap low as we drove through our neighborhood. 3 news trucks were parked on our street, and I could see Mrs. Chin peeking through her curtains at the chaos. How did this become a media circus so fast? Someone at the hospital probably called it in, I said, slumping down in the passenger seat. Paramedic refuses to treat dying teenager makes good television. We were staying at Dad's brother's house across town. Uncle Mike had taken one look at the news coverage and immediately offered his guest room. As we pulled into his driveway, my phone buzzed with yet another text from an unknown number. The 5th journalist today trying to get my side of the story. But it was the message underneath that made my stomach drop. From Sarah, the paramedic who'd saved my life. Asterisk Kayla, this is Sarah from yesterday. I hope you're recovering well. I wanted you to know that Channel 7 just ran a segment about your case. They're painting your mother as the victim now. Thought you should see it before you make your decision. Link attached, asterisk. The video was only 3 minutes long, but it felt like a nightmare. Linda, perfectly made up and wearing her best, grieving mother, expression, sat across from a sympathetic reporter in our living room. My daughter has struggled with anxiety for years, Linda was saying, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. As her mother, I've learned to distinguish between real emergencies and panic attacks. Yesterday, I made a split-second decision based on years of experience with her condition. The reporter nodded encouragingly. So you felt the paramedics were overreacting? I felt they were responding to what appeared to be another anxiety episode. Kayla has convinced emergency responders before that she was having heart attacks or appendicitis when she was actually having panic attacks. Linda's voice broke convincingly. I was trying to protect her from unnecessary trauma and medical procedures. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. She was lying. Openly, boldly lying on television, rewriting history to make herself look like the protective mother instead of the woman who'd nearly killed me. What about the almond extract? The reporter asked. Some reports suggest you accidentally used it in place of vanilla. Linda's expression shifted to confused innocence. I've been cooking that recipe for 15 years. I've never used almond extract, and there was none in my kitchen yesterday. The paramedics may have found an old bottle in my pantry, but it wasn't used in dinner. She leaned forward slightly. I think my daughter may have eaten something earlier that day. She's been experimenting with different foods lately, trying to lose weight for prom. The lie was so audacious it took my breath away. Not only was she denying responsibility for poisoning me, she was suggesting I'd done it to myself as some kind of diet scheme gone wrong. There are also allegations of a pattern of medical neglect, the reporter continued. Linda's lawyer, when had she gotten a lawyer, stepped into frame. Mrs. Thompson has been a devoted mother for 16 years. Every medical decision she's made has been in her daughter's best interest. We believe this investigation is the result of overzealous hospital staff and a troubled teenager's attempt to avoid accountability for her own risky behavior. The segment ended with Linda tearfully appealing directly to the camera, I love my daughter more than life itself. If she's angry with me for not enabling her anxiety, I understand. But I won't apologize for trying to teach her healthy coping mechanisms instead of rushing to the emergency room every time she feels overwhelmed. Uncle Mike found me 20 minutes later, still staring at my phone in shock. Jesus, kid, you look like you've seen a ghost. She's lying, I whispered, showing him the video. About everything. The almond extract, my medical history, all of it. He watched the segment twice, his expression growing darker. Well, that changes things, doesn't it? It did. Because 24 hours ago, I'd been wrestling with whether to destroy my imperfect mother or find a way to forgive her. But the woman on that screen wasn't my imperfect mother, she was a stranger who was perfectly willing to destroy me to save herself. My phone rang. Detective Morrison. I assume you've seen Channel 7, she said without preamble. Yeah. Mrs. Thompson's attorney contacted our office an hour ago. They're claiming you have a history of making false allegations when you don't get your way. Apparently you once accused a teacher of harassment when he gave you a poor grade. That had been Mr. Rodriguez, my sophomore English teacher who'd called me overdramatic and attention-seeking when I tried to explain why I'd missed class during a particularly bad anxiety episode. I'd reported it to the guidance counselor, not because I wanted to get him in trouble, but because I needed someone to understand that his comments were making my anxiety worse. They're twisting everything, I said. I know. But Kayla, you need to understand, this is what defense attorneys do. If this goes to trial, they're going to put your entire mental health history on display. Every therapy session, every panic attack, every time you've ever been wrong about a symptom. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Linda's performance on television, her calculated tears and carefully constructed lies. About the neighbors who'd probably watched it and decided I was just another troubled teenager trying to blame my parents for my problems. Detective Morrison, I said slowly, what would happen if I had proof she was lying about the almond extract? What kind of proof? I closed my eyes, remembering something I'd forgotten in all the chaos. I recorded her that night. When she was yelling about the ambulance bill and how I was embarrassing the family. It's still on my phone. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Kayla, Detective Morrison said finally, I need you to send me that recording right now. The recording was 17 minutes long, captured automatically when I tried to call 911 and my phone had glitched into voice memo mode instead. I'd completely forgotten about it until Detective Morrison asked about proof, but there it was in my phone's memory, 17 minutes of Linda's voice saying things she'd probably never expected anyone else to hear. I sent it to Detective Morrison and waited. She called back in less than an hour. Kayla, this recording is substantial. We have your mother clearly stating she used 2 or 3 tablespoons of almond extract as a vanilla substitute. We also have her saying, and I quote, I'm not paying for another one of Kayla's dramatic episodes when she's perfectly fine. Detective Morrison paused. But there's something else on here that's concerning. Around minute 14, she's talking to someone, sounds like your father, and she says she's going to control the narrative before this gets out of hand. My stomach sank. The interview. Linda had been planning her media strategy from the hospital parking lot. There's more, Detective Morrison continued. She mentions having dealt with Kayla's lies before and knowing exactly how to handle overzealous doctors. This suggests a deliberate pattern of interference with your medical care. Dad walked into the kitchen just as I hung up, carrying a bag of groceries and wearing the haunted expression he'd had since yesterday. Was that about the charges? She recorded herself, Dad. The night it happened, she recorded herself admitting to everything she just denied on TV. I showed him the phone. 17 minutes of her talking about how she used almond extract, how she wasn't going to pay for my dramatic episodes, how she was going to control the story. Dad set down the groceries heavily. Jesus, Kayla. She really said all that? And more. She told someone, maybe her sister, that she was tired of my medical attention seeking and that she was going to put a stop to it once and for all. Put a stop to it how? I pulled up the recording and skipped to minute 11. Linda's voice filled the kitchen, clear and cold. I'm not enabling this behavior anymore, Susan. Every time Kayla feels anxious or wants attention, she suddenly has some medical emergency. Well, yesterday proved my point. The paramedics wasted 40 minutes on a panic attack that resolved itself as soon as she got the attention she wanted. Dad's face went white. She's talking like you weren't actually sick. It gets worse. I fast-forwarded to minute 15. Listen to this part. Need to get ahead of this before the hospital makes it into some kind of child abuse case. I've already called Channel 7. Rebecca Martinez owes me a favor from the PDA fundraising committee, and she's going to help me frame this correctly. Make it about overzealous medical staff and teenage drama instead of. Dad grabbed my phone and paused the recording. She planned the whole interview. Before she even knew if you were going to be okay, she was already planning how to make herself look like the victim. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent yesterday wondering if I could forgive Linda's moment of panic, her stubborn refusal to admit she was wrong. But this wasn't a moment of panic. This was calculated damage control. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Asterisk, this is Rebecca Martinez from Channel 7. Your mother shared some concerning details about your history of false medical claims. Would you like to respond to these allegations before we air our follow-up segment tonight? Asterisk. They're doing another story, I said, showing Dad the text. And Rebecca Martinez, isn't she the one who did that expose on welfare fraud last year? Dad nodded grimly. Linda's setting you up, sweetheart. She's going to destroy your credibility before you can testify against her. Outside, I could hear news vans pulling up to Uncle Mike's house. Someone must have figured out where we were staying. Through the kitchen window, I saw a reporter adjusting her blazer, preparing to knock on the door. I have to stop this, I said, my hands shaking as I scrolled through Detective Morrison's contact information. I have to give them the recording before she does any more interviews. But even as I dialed, I realized Linda had already won the first battle. By tomorrow morning, half the city would believe I was a troubled teenager who tried to frame my devoted mother for a medical emergency I'd caused myself. The question now wasn't whether I was willing to testify against her. It was whether anyone would believe me when I did. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with fluorescent lights that made everyone look pale and tired. I sat in the witness box, my hands folded in my lap to hide their shaking, staring at Linda across the room. She was wearing her navy blue dress, the one she saved for parent-teacher conferences and church, and the same mask of wounded dignity she'd worn during every television interview over the past 3 months. Her lawyer, Mr. Patterson, had spent 45 minutes trying to paint me as an unstable teenager with a history of medical attention-seeking behavior. He'd brought up every panic attack, every urgent care visit, every time I'd been wrong about a symptom. The jury looked skeptical, and I couldn't blame them. On paper, I probably did look like a problem child. But now it was my turn. Miss Thompson, Detective Morrison said, standing near the prosecutor's table, I'd like you to tell the jury what happened on the evening of March 15th when the paramedics arrived. I took a shaky breath and looked directly at the 12 people who would decide whether my mother faced criminal charges for medical neglect. I was having an allergic reaction to almond extract that my mother had used in dinner. My face was swollen, I had hives everywhere, and I couldn't breathe properly. When the paramedics tried to give me epinephrine, my mother told them I was faking and refused to give consent for treatment. How long did this refusal last? 23 minutes, according to the paramedic report. I lost consciousness twice during that time. Mr. Patterson stood up. Objection, Your Honor. The witness is testifying about medical records she couldn't have observed while unconscious. Sustained, Judge Martinez said. The jury will disregard. Detective Morrison nodded calmly. Kayla, do you remember what your mother said to the paramedics when they explained you were in anaphylactic shock? She said I was being dramatic and that this happened all the time. She said she wasn't going to pay for another unnecessary ambulance ride. My voice grew stronger as I continued. She told them I was just having an anxiety attack and that I would calm down once I got attention. And during this time, how were you feeling? Like I was dying. The words came out as barely a whisper. I kept trying to tell her I couldn't breathe, but she wouldn't look at me. She was more concerned about what the neighbors would think than about whether I was actually sick. From the defendant's table, Linda dabbed her eyes with a tissue, playing the grieving mother perfectly. But I wasn't 14 anymore, scared of making her angry. I was 17, and I'd almost died because of her pride. Detective Morrison walked over to the evidence table. Your Honor, I'd like to play Prosecution Exhibit A for the jury. The bailiff set up the audio equipment, and suddenly Linda's voice filled the courtroom, not the careful, sympathetic tone from her interviews, but her real voice from that night. Clear, cold, and absolutely damning. 2 tablespoons, maybe 3. The recipe called for vanilla, but I thought almond would taste better. How much did you use, Mrs. Thompson? Came Mike's voice on the recording. The jury was paying attention now. Mrs. Williams in the front row looked shocked. Mr. Chen, no relation to our neighbor, was taking notes. But it was the next part that made Linda's face go white. I'm not enabling this behavior anymore, Susan. Every time Kayla feels anxious or wants attention, she suddenly has some medical emergency. The courtroom was dead silent except for Linda's recorded voice continuing, "I've already called Channel 7. Rebecca Martinez owes me a favor, and she's going to help me frame this correctly. Make it about overzealous medical staff instead of." Judge Martinez turned off the recording herself. The damage was done. For 17 minutes, the jury had listened to Linda plan her media strategy, dismiss my symptoms, and admit to using the almond extract she'd later claimed wasn't in our kitchen. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand, I caught Linda's eye one last time. She wasn't crying anymore. The mask had slipped completely, and what I saw underneath was exactly what I'd always suspected, a woman who would rather see me dead than admit she was wrong. 3 hours later, the jury found her guilty on all counts. For the first time in my life, someone had listened to me. Someone had believed me. And finally, I could breathe.